Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. It's good to be with you again this week. It is Public Schools Week here in Oklahoma. We are very glad to be celebrating and to be talking about public schools today. We have a special guest for you in just a few minutes. It's going to be Erika Wright from the Rural Schools Coalition. But first, just a quick note. Two things. One, this episode is being recorded virtually, so the sound quality is a little bit different. I apologize if it's bad. We're using a new platform. We'll see how it goes. Secondly, today that I'm recording this is February 29th. It is Leap Day, and that means it is also deadline day at the Oklahoma State Legislature. Today is the first major deadline. It is the day that bills must be out of committee in their chamber of origin, right? That means House bills have to be out of House committee, Senate bills have to be out of Senate committee, excluding appropriations and budget bills, which don't come into play until April. So, as we record this in the afternoon, we don't yet know what all is alive and what's dead. Of course, no bill is ever truly dead until they adjourn sine die in late May, but if bills are dead at the end of the day today, there's a good chance, a decent chance, that they will be dead for the rest of this session. And that means a big chunk of bills, roughly half, I think, of all the legislation that's been proposed this year will likely be dead, or at least dormant, for the rest of this year. And that means there'll be a lot of folks celebrating today and a lot of folks taking a big sigh of relief. There's a long way to go, right? There's still the floor deadlines in the Chamber of Origin. Then everything crosses over and goes through the process again on the other side. So we'll see what happens. But for right now, it's a pivotal day. I am working on our bill sheet for all the democracy, votings, and elections and all of that, those bills. And I will be sending that out in an email blast in the next few days. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe over the weekend. As soon as I can get it done. My kids got a soccer tournament this weekend. It's tough to get work done from the soccer fields, and that is obviously the more pressing and important thing that I need to do with my time. But for today, listeners, I'm here with you. And for the next 45 to 48 minutes, we're going to be talking about education, which is such a pivotal and important issue in Oklahoma. And for this week in particular, it's been top of mind for hopefully most of you, certainly many of my colleagues who work directly in the education system, structure, advocacy, adjacent organizations. So without further ado, let's get on to our guest. My guest today is Erika Wright, who is the founder and director of the Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition. Welcome to the program, Erika.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here with you today.
It's so great. This is Public Schools Week, right? This is a national thing. It's not just in Oklahoma, but it's a big deal, like around the country. I think it's exciting to see, even just scrolling my Twitter feed and Instagram or whatever these apps are called today. X, I guess my X feed. And I feel like my X feed is a different conversation. Something to do with social media. But looking there, and I think I had probably mistakenly thought that this was just an Oklahoma thing because we are steeped in the public school conversation here in our state. But it's really part of a national thing, right? This is like a national week where advocates and supporters and participants in public schools come together to really highlight the important role that public schools have in our communities. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it is absolutely fair. It's exactly what you said and more, and just celebrating the accomplishments and all of the great things that are happening in our public schools. And I think that's even more important now than ever as we see so much negativity surrounding the narrative of public schools. This is a great week for us to kind of take that narrative back and talk about the wonderful things that public schools offer to our communities.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll come back to the week itself and advocacy days and that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about you as a person so that our listeners get to know you. Can you, Erika, tell us a little bit about your background and how you kind of got into this arena?
Yeah, so my degree is actually in elementary education. I graduated with that degree from Oklahoma State in the early 90s. And then because of some life events and having a child and being a single mom, I couldn't afford to teach. I couldn't afford to be a single mom and teach in the classroom. And so my career led me down a different pathway through sales and marketing and some other things, later to owning a construction company with my husband. But so I've always had a passion for public education. I've always had a passion for supporting my children's teachers in the classrooms. And, really, how I kind of stumbled into this state advocacy role has just been kind of a true grassroots story of building the ship as we go. Back in I guess it would have been in the fall of 2018, there was a bill introduced on the Senate side called Senate Bill 441 that was about the 4-day school calendar. And at the time, my school district that we live in now was operating on a 4-day school calendar. And we want to be able to keep the ability to have that local decision. And so I kind of started digging into that bill and rallying people, and we started this little Facebook group for 4-day school advocates on this one bill. And then that bill came to a head right about when COVID hit. And so everything fell apart, right? Because they had bigger fish to fry than what our school calendars were. And so we had this small Facebook group of about, I don't know, 2,500, 3,000 people that had been advocating for that bill. And so we decided at that point, we kind of looked at the landscape, and there wasn't really anybody out there that was doing front-facing social media advocacy for rural schools in particular, which a lot of those issues are the same, right? Whether you're from Edmond or you're from Noble or you're from Wynnewood, a lot of us share the same issues, but rural schools in particular do have a host of unique situations that they're presented with. So at that point, we decided to rebrand to the Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition. And now we have grown to over 12,000 members from all 77 counties of the state. And we're just rocking and rolling. And I think here in the next 6 months or so, we're going to look to kind of formalize this thing and put ourselves into a little more formalized, organized realm of an advocacy group.
Sure, yeah. And so most of this connection has been through social media, I think through Facebook in particular. It's funny, I had a conversation today with a friend whom I met through Twitter back when Let's Fix This first started in 2016. And we were talking about how different the social media landscape is today. And she's someone that's kind of gotten off of social media over the last few years. And she said, I'm thinking about getting back on. Where can I get back to re-engage with people involved in like
Yeah.
advocacy in Oklahoma? And I was like, well, it's a lot different now. I said, for me, and I think a lot of organizations, like Facebook fell out of favor for some people, but has now kind of come back around as Twitter has, I don't know, decompensated
Yeah.
over the last couple of years, where it is just not as useful or certainly not as friendly as it used to be.
No.
But also, I think this unique point in history, looking more broadly, right, that social media and the internet provides a platform for people from disparate communities to connect with one another. And this is such a great example, right, that whether you are in Noble or Wynnewood or Edmond or Idabel or whatever,
Right.
you're able to connect with people who have a lot of the same struggles and maybe share the same values and approach to this issue in particular that you wouldn't otherwise interact with, right? Unless you were like driving from town to town. So this kind of activity 30 years ago was just not possible.
No.
And I'm curious through your eyes as someone who had been an educator and had kind of been on another side of this issue, how do you see that as this connection, right? Like I said, this network of public school advocates across the state. How does that inform what you do today, and how do you think that changes the conversation?
Well, I hope we're making strides in changing the conversation. I think, when you look at social media, like you said, 30 years ago, heck, even 10 years ago, we weren't able to connect with people in a way that we can now with social media. Now, we all have our personal views on social media. Some days I would love to shut it down and walk away, but it's such a powerful tool in amplifying voices and, like you said, in connecting people. You know, what I see from a rural perspective is that here we are in this age of information overload, right? Like we know what our friend had for breakfast and we know what news happened in China 15 minutes ago sometimes. So we have all of this information being thrown at us from every direction. But from a rural perspective, even though we have all this information out there in social media, I think it's important to note, especially when you talk about advocacy and sharing news and information, that because of the advent of social media, we've also seen a decline in smaller newspapers around the state, right? So our rural
Hmm.
voters, our rural families, especially our older voters, our grandparents, they're not getting as much local information and state applicable information as maybe they had in the past because they don't have their local paper showing up on their doorstep, and many people are too far away for delivery for Oklahoma City and Tulsa World. And again, our senior voters aren't necessarily logging online, and so in the rural advocacy space, it's quite interesting because we have more connection than we've ever had before through social media, but yet we still have some new challenges because of social media that have created an information desert in some pockets of the state and certain populations. And so while I think we are definitely making strides in getting information to voters about what's really happening at the Capitol regarding their public schools, I think we have a lot of places that we could improve on that as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's where organizations like yours fill that void, right? Like
Right.
my sister lives in a rural town, Hera, right, just east of Oklahoma City, and she relies. There's a Facebook group called Everything Hera.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a government account. I don't know who runs it. Kind of a
Right.
chamber-ish person or someone business
Yeah.
person, but that's like the hub of most of her information about what's happening in town, which ends up being, as those things go, like a little bit of like a local gossip column about
Sure.
whose dog is out. Like there's a while back, my sister had some pigs and one got out, and
Yeah.
the moment that pig ended up on the Facebook group, she was like, "That's it, we're done with the pigs. Like I'm not going to be embarrassed by a hog this way." And I think but you're exactly right. I used to run Freedom of Information Oklahoma, and we are constantly kind of keeping a finger on the pulse of journalism in rural areas. And
Yeah.
as those local papers have died or been bought up by larger
Right.
conglomerates and kind of turned into just advertising delivery systems,
Right.
it is harder and harder for folks to stay informed with the issues that matter close to home. They might watch cable news
Right.
and have I don't, an idea about what's happening nationally. Whether that idea is accurate or not is probably
Right.
a matter of perception. But
Mhm.
when it comes to things like what's happening at the state capitol with legislation that's proposed,
Right.
what are our legislators saying, what are our local school boards doing, a lot of that by nature has to come from us, like from the community, and helping keep one another informed, right? And so
Yeah.
I think I view this for Let's Fix This, and I think you probably share this with the Rural Schools Coalition, that there's like a responsibility to try to provide factual information to, I'll say, your constituents, for lack of a
Right.
better term, right? Like your followers, your members of your group, but to there's a responsibility there to keep them involved in the process. How do you and that can be tough, right? Like that's tough for everybody. It's tough for actual journalists. It's tough for all of us to try to provide a good information. What do you find like is most, I don't know, resonant? Like if you were sharing information about the Capitol or about advocacy, have you noticed that like there's certain types of not certain types of content, but like certain messages that seem to resonate more with rural school supporters than others?
Well, I would say, we have everything out of Facebook in general. That's kind of where we do have a Twitter account, but most of our community is in within Facebook and it's in within a group. And we did that on purpose because we know that our average person who's engaging in our group is most likely to be female, and they're most likely to be between the ages of 30 and 55. And that's kind of our core group in our Facebook group. And I think as far as kind of the content that seems to resonate with people, we're cyclical. Obviously, during legislative season, we're talking a lot more about bills and giving people opportunity to take action. I think probably in the last year, the two areas where we have seen the most interaction, number one, is when we celebrate what's going on in their local schools, right? When
Yeah, yeah.
Little Axe girls wrestling team just won state, so we're celebrating that today. And people love to see not only the great things that their own kids are doing shared in a broader community, but they like to see the successes of other towns. And so we do get a lot of interaction on our celebratory posts. And I would say here in the last couple of years, our two biggest topics of content that people seem to really cling to is the discussion, obviously, that we had about public funds going to private schools with school vouchers and tax credits. And then also the issue of certain politicians wanting to remove federal funding from our rural schools. And, I think when you strip away national politics and you look at the heart of a rural school community, that school truly is the heartbeat for everything that's going on in that community, right? And people know that kiddos in their school are not being fed well when they come home. They know that their kids are dealing with high poverty situations and all of the things that are attached to that. And so, this idea of removing federal funding is applicable to anybody, no matter what community you're in. But in a rural community, I think what we have seen is people really are resistant to that idea, and they understand that the benefit of federal funds for their schools are something that is truly irreplaceable, because our state doesn't have the money to replace it, right? So to me, I
Right.
think in the last couple of years, those seem to be the content that people really have gotten behind and amplified their voices around.
Yeah. Do you, there's, we're in the midst of, I would say, a teacher crisis, right, in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
We have been for years. It's gotten worse. It doesn't get the press today that it got 5 or 6 years ago, but we have like the largest number of emergency certifications or teachers that have been emergency certified or alternately certified. We also have, I think, a record number of just vacancies of spots that don't have teachers to fill. I don't have any sense if that is skewed between urban and rural or if it's equally distributed across the state. How are those things affecting at schools in rural Oklahoma?
Well, I think you're right, and we also have to remember we have the adjunct teachers in that mix as well, who aren't necessarily trained to be teachers in the first place. And so it would be helpful for the conversation if we could get good solid data out of the State Department of Education on where these vacancies, where these emergency certifications are. I still have open records requests outstanding from last April. And so I'm going to go ahead and answer this just from my gut, because don't have the data. I've asked for the data. I'm not able to get the data, the full data. But I think it's definitely, the teacher crisis is definitely impacting rural schools, particularly in our border communities where we're bordering with other states, right? So, for example, a great example would be when you look at the districts who were previously on a 4-day school schedule, who are now, a lot of them are using virtual days and things like that. They're doing that. One of the main reasons that they've been doing that and continue to do that is to retain their teachers from crossing state lines. So in southeastern Oklahoma is where you see a lot of those schools in particular. And you look at the 4-day schools in Texas, they're all in Northeast Texas. And so the 4-day school week has been something that a lot of rural schools have been holding on to as best they can in order to retain their teachers from crossing over into other states where they can make more money and they can have that 4-day schedule. So I don't think that rural is, I'm sure we all have our different issues when dealing with teacher recruitment and retention. But, it's a lot harder to recruit a teacher to go to Bowlegs than it is somebody to Tulsa, right? Like they
Hmm.
have to have a
Hmm.
different desire for what their space is going to look like and living. And so we definitely, it's definitely, we're feeling it in the rural areas as well. And, and it's difficult when you have, I think if you were to look at a lot of our rural communities, your community of educators are people who may have grown up in that town or in a neighboring town. Their families are there. They want to go back to rural Oklahoma, but we also see that our teacher prep programs are losing enrollment as well. And so I'm really concerned about the future of rural Oklahoma as these kids decide they don't want to stay here and they don't want to come back to the rural communities. What is this going to look like in 5 or 10 years? It's pretty terrifying to think about.
Yeah, I think, man, our state has a bad, bless you. Our state has a bad habit of, I don't know, cutting off our nose to spite our face. And
Yeah.
maybe I frame it with a different phrase, but like we are, we have a bad habit of making decisions for today without fully appreciating the consequences we will face tomorrow, right? Particularly, I think we see this with budget stuff, right? Like it's
Right.
easy to cut taxes, and we have a long history of like cutting taxes, and then a few years later, something happens and it comes back to bite us, right? The big crisis in 2016, 2017 was because of that tax cut trigger bill they passed,
Yep.
5 or 6 years prior. I have some concern. Like I think that the governor just signed the elimination of the state grocery tax, sales tax, which I think is like good policy because it's a somewhat like progressive tax policy.
Right.
But we didn't fill that budget hole, right? So we're saving individuals some money, which is good. Like especially
Right.
lower income folks, that's good. That's empirically good. But it's going to cost our state $400 million a year. And I was like, oh, so over a decade, that's $4 billion,
Yeah.
right? Like that's
Yeah.
an enormous amount of money that our state won't get to spend on core services like education, like healthcare, like all
Right.
these things we need. And without a plan to like make that up, it's just going to cause us to suffer in the future. And like I don't, that's if I save a couple $100 or $1,000 a year on grocery sales tax, that's good. But if my car hits one too many potholes on the highway and I have to like pay that in
Right.
car repairs, like it's a it's a wash. And I think we do that with
Yeah.
education policy too, right? Where we not just cut back on the number of teachers in classrooms today, but the environment we have created makes people less interested in going into education careers in the future, which means we will have fewer and fewer qualified teachers every single year. And I don't know what the point is that it adds up to like where we just don't have enough to go around. And then we have to what? Consolidate schools, cut schools, close things. Like then it's a devastating blow to communities, all because of something that somebody thought was good to get reelected, 5 or 10 years ago. Same thing in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
Students who attend like medical school here at like the OU Health Sciences Center can't complete all of their requirements in Oklahoma. They have to go out of state
Right.
for some of their residency requirements in order to become a doctor. And if we can't provide a comprehensive medical education to potential doctors, not only are they not going to come here for school, they're not going to come work here afterwards. And then
No.
it's like, well, then you are actively pushing away educated, well-resourced families, right, who would otherwise be spending their money and their lives here. We're pushing them out of state, and it's like if that's the case, then we are a net exporter of everything good, right? Like, and that's no way to run a state.
No, it's no way to run a state. And I'm totally with you in that is that it's whatever gets the headline of the day, whatever gets the votes for that election cycle versus what is going to happen down the road in the future. With the teacher shortage, we would look at, I think the last number I saw was there's around 30,000 people in the state of Oklahoma that are certified to be teachers, that have trained to be teachers, gone to school to be teachers. They're certified who are no longer in the classroom. And we
Right.
continue to come up with these, I say we, not me, those at the Capitol, those at the State Department of Education continue to come up with these ways to attract teachers beyond just raising the pay, which is obviously definitely needs to happen. But we come up with all these schemes in order to attract teachers back into the classroom, but yet it's ludicrous to me that nobody seems to realize that, you know, maybe if you would just respect teachers from the get go, not continue to villainize them every chance you get in the media. To me, I think the bigger issue with this teacher recruitment and retention issue that we have is because people are just tired of being disrespected. Nobody would stay in a
Yeah.
job where you have a manager who's constantly berating you and giving you more hurdles to jump over and not giving you a raise every year. Like, nobody would stay in that job in the private sector in that type of an
Right.
environment. But yet here
Right.
we have government officials that are, trying to come up with these programs to attract teachers, and at the same breath, on the same day, they're making posts from their car attacking teachers.
Right.
you
Right.
know and so even not even just from a policy perspective, but just from a cultural perspective, the way that we view and we treat our educators in this state, until that changes, I don't see that we're going to be successful at turning this ship around, and I don't know how
Yeah.
to change that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about advocacy because that's one way, right? Like
Yeah.
that's, and I will say this. I'm probably going to send this out as an email blast anyway. So, listeners, if you haven't already read the email, just be prepared. But it is increasingly apparent to me, right, that no one is coming to save us. That like if we want change in this world, it is up to us to make that change.
Yep.
There's a lot of ways you can go about doing it. Some are more effective than others. It probably takes all of us doing everything we can
Yeah.
to move progress forward. And I'm sure that's the way it's always been, right? Like
Yeah.
in history, we point to specific individuals that like were big change makers, and they definitely had a huge role. But it wasn't just them; like it was
Right.
thousands and millions of people behind them doing the same thing. And it is like I've wrestled with this all week of like it's both a demoralizing concept that like we are the change makers that we need, and also like an intimidating and exciting concept that's like, oh right, no, we can do this.
Yeah.
Like it might be really hard, but like so was going to the moon and we've done that. Like we can do this, right? It doesn't
Right. Right.
we can do hard things, right? Especially if we do it together.
Yeah.
And so we started this conversation talking about Public Schools Week, which is this week. Yesterday, we're recording this on Thursday the 29th. So Wednesday
Mhm.
of this week was Advocacy Day at the state capitol. You had some lovely remarks during that. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
what the purpose of that Advocacy Day was, and like just kind of give us a general synopsis of what happened.
So yesterday was a great day at the Capitol for public school advocacy. It's always exciting to be in the room with other people that are like-minded and have the same goals and passions as you. So we were honored to be able to co-host. The Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition co-hosted the day with the Oklahoma Parent Legislative Advocacy Coalition and Oklahoma
Yeah.
PTA. And then we had several, I think dozens of other advocacy organizations. Everybody's kind of, in their own world, but we're bringing those silos together to have one voice and have a stronger voice collectively as a group. And so we had people there from all over the state. I talked with everything from parents to grandparents to teachers, superintendents, just a great mix of community leaders, people that were there, all there to first, we kicked it off with a pep rally. We had students from Edmond who sang the national anthem. We had students from Noble and students from Shawnee and Norman who helped to lead the Pledge of Allegiance like they do every day in public school. We had faith leaders there to talk about the importance of pushing back against this thing we have going on in Oklahoma where we're trying to blur the lines between church and state. in our public schools.
Hmm.
It was really encouraging to see faith leaders from all different faiths that were up on stage together, standing side by side to support our public schools. And then, everybody came together. Gittner Drummond was our keynote speaker. He was able to speak and address the crowd, which it was really refreshing from my perspective to have a politician who's up there boldly proclaiming the importance of protecting our public schools and pledging his support as he moves throughout his political career to be there to support our kiddos in public school. And so we had a big pep rally, and then everybody, went out and had appointments and went out and spoke with their legislators on both the House and the Senate side about the issues that were important to them, the bills that a lot of us are watching. There's actually a lot of really good bills out there that have survived this first deadline of committee, and so I'm encouraged that this is one of the few years that I think it's the first year I've ever seen where there's a lot of positive bills to support versus always fighting the negative. And we saw Mark McBride's bill yesterday. A lot of us were in the gallery at the House. We got to see him pass his bill to expand the state school board positions. And so we're really excited about that. And so it was just a wonderful day. We had apple pie after lunch with our legislators because there's nothing more American than public schools and apple pie, right? And so we got to sit and have some time with our legislators across the table as groups and enjoying some apple pie together and talking about our public schools. So I think I'm very encouraged to see that, I think if you look at this, even 5 years ago, you would see a lot of different groups out there that were advocating for public schools, but doing it in their own silo, right? And so what we've started to see is all of us are now starting to merge and come together and form a broader coalition and have one voice. We all differ a little bit on certain policy things that are coming through, but like you said, I mean, when you look at, there's no one coming to save us, right? It's up to us, and it can feel like we're trying to climb Mount Everest with no shoes sometimes. So it's always nice to have other people alongside to strengthen that voice and strengthen that team, and that's really what yesterday was all about. And it was really, really, a special day to be a part of.
Yeah. I was there for the first part of the morning, which is why I wanted you to describe it, because I wasn't able to stick around for the apple pie. Honestly, I was really bummed to miss
It
out
was really good. You missed
on that.
it. Yeah.
It was, but the Edmund Memorial Choir, say what you will about the national anthem, but when done well, it is like hauntingly beautiful. And it definitely obviously like harkens to a different time when it was written.
Yeah.
But to hear their voices in the rotunda was like just a holy moment in some ways, right? Of like,
really
oh,
was.
right,
It really was.
we can be better than this. That was great. And, your remarks, Misty Bradley from PLAC, who's, I think we've been on the show before, General Drummond, like these were all, and everybody else. There was a bunch of other speakers in there. It was just a really refreshing reminder. And so, listeners, I will say, if you weren't able to be there yesterday or this week, well, you missed out. But there are many other Capitol days yet to come this year for a myriad of issues. If you haven't been to the state capitol in a few years, and I know a lot of you haven't, you should go. For one, the building is much more beautiful than it was when I started doing this. The renovation project, I was just standing there looking at the rotunda being like, it is like, if you don't remember what it was like before, just picture like smoker's teeth yellow everything. That's what it was, like that weird beige color. Some of it's because they used to smoke in there, right? Like in the last 100 years when they didn't fix it up. But it's beautiful now. And I feel like that, to me at least, is like a little bit of reverence for what we could be, right? It like helps me remember that we can aspire to be better in how we take care of our buildings for sure, and how we take care of our people and our state as well. And so being there for this important purpose was filled my cup a little bit. And I think we could all use that this year, especially this month.
I think even if you, like you said, even if people don't make it, if they miss that event, there's every single day there's something going on. And every time that I'm up there, I'm not a professional lobbyist, but I say lobbying, talking with legislators, I'm always moved by whatever group is there, because it's a really great snapshot into just kind of democracy and how it works, and people are there fighting for whatever it is they believe in, whether it's,
Yeah.
conservation or education or whatever the case may be. It's just a real honor to be able to walk those halls knowing some of the great people that have been there. And I think yesterday was very special in that, really the reason we picked that theme of, public schools as American as apple pie, and we had the pep rally with the national anthem, all of these things, is we really wanted to kind of take that narrative back, right? That we are all Americans and we are all Oklahomans. And this whole divisive thing of, if you don't believe exactly the way I believe and you don't pray exactly the way that I pray, then you are less of an American, is
Right.
absolute nonsense. And so that's kind of the spirit we were trying to create yesterday, was taking that back and really celebrating the, the that our public schools are kind of the bedrock. They're the foundation of our democracy here in the United States of America. And so it was just, I agree with you. When they sang the national anthem, it was just such a moving moment. My eyes might have leaked a little bit, I'll admit.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And it's always like tough to say like taking back these terms or this
Right.
phrasing because that somebody acknowledges that we lost it,
Right.
right? And I
True.
think,
True. Yeah.
but you're not wrong. I'm not trying to say that. Like it's just there are there are aspects of our democracy we have lost because we let them slip away, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's exhausting to be hyper vigilant about everything, but it is we all know like it's easier to do maintenance than it is to like do the big repair in the end. And in some cases, like there are strong forces working against us to do the damage in the first place. But this is a good reminder of like why folks can't just tune in for one bill in one year, but like why we really need people to be engaged all the time, right? And you don't have to like exhaust yourself, but the more that we collectively are like engaged in the civic process or civic life,
Right.
which isn't just voting. It's not just voting. It's not just political stuff. It's like talking to your neighbors. I learned more about public schools in Oklahoma from my neighbor 2 doors down, whose kids are a little bit older than mine. Well, they're in between my kids, but her kids go to our local school here. And so I learned more about like my local elementary from her and her kids. And we talk often about what's happening with our local school board or city council, traffic patterns around the school, all this kind of stuff that's like
Right.
most of us take for granted, right? But it affects hundreds of families from every school around. Like it's a big deal. And so I think those kinds of conversations we've stopped having. Like we don't connect with our neighbors as much as we used to. I was talking to somebody yesterday, I think at the state capitol actually, and they were telling me about in the city of Shawnee. Oh no, it was last night. That's what it was. Last night we had a event in Norman, and someone was telling me in the city of Shawnee, a lot of neighborhoods have like started having like monthly neighborhood like block parties, kind of right, and they'll invite
Oh, I
the
love that.
fire department out or whatever. But it's just like a instead of having a backyard barbecue, it's like doing it in the front yard and just
Yeah.
getting your neighbors together. And they said it has like changed the dynamics of their community in lots of ways. And I don't know all the details yet, but the way it was told to me
Mhm.
sounded just lovely, right? That
Right.
we've lost a lot of that connection in a lot of neighborhoods into like we can't wait for someone else to create it. Like everyone's like, well, someone should throw a party, and it's like, why don't you throw the
Right.
party? Like you
Right.
should do it. Just
Right.
pass out flyers or just pull your grill around to the front yard and start cooking burgers. Someone's going to walk
Turn
up
on some
and
music and,
ask what's going on.
yeah, turn on some music
Yeah,
and have your ice chest and get it done.
right.
I feel
Yeah,
like
people will show up.
I feel like anytime you find yourself saying somebody should do XYZ, then that's
Hmm.
your signal that maybe you are the person that needs to be doing XYZ or finding somebody to
Right,
do it, right? And
right.
I think a lot of the problems we have that we're facing right now, particularly in this public school arena, is COVID really did a number on the social interaction between neighbors, and it polarized, for whatever reason, it seemed to just kind of polarize people in a lot of ways politically. And so they stopped having those conversations with neighbors who may be different on the political scale, but you have a lot more in common with one another than you don't. And, in rural communities, you might not see the block parties, but I think just by geographic design, rural communities may have lost that a little bit less than suburban and urban communities, because you do have everything always going on in the same space around the schools and stuff like that. We lived in Norman
Yeah.
for 25 years before we moved to Noble. And that's one of the things that I love about living in my hometown now. And I loved living in Norman. I mean, we were there forever, but when you're in a larger town, it's easier to kind of just drive into your garage at night and shut the door and, watch whatever and do your thing and have your few little friends you do things with. And because we lost all of that connection during COVID, I think we're just really still in the stages of digging that back and hopefully bringing people back to a place where they're talking to their neighbors over the fence and they're not just avoiding one another because of politics, because that's not how we get anything done, you know?
Right. Yeah. That's so funny. In uh, what's his name? The book Bowling Alone, right? Robert Putnam, right? Classic book, came out 20, 30 years ago now. But really, I think a pivotal moment of understanding for a lot of people about the forces shaping our society and like how we've lost this connection. And in the book, he talks about the advent of attached garages, which you kind of referenced, right? Of like that once that shifted, people just pull in their garage, close the door, and go inside. You don't even see them walking from their car to the house. And when I read that, I was living in either Yukon or Edmond. Either way, I had a attached garage, and I was like, "Oh, that's funny," but probably doesn't really. I was like, "That seems like a very silly thing." But now I live in Oklahoma City, and our house is older. It's about 90 years old, and so like it technically has an attached garage. It was way too small to park in. I don't know how any car in the 40s even fit in there. And so everyone parks in the driveways, and I do see people all the time, like
Yeah,
out walking to their cars,
yeah,
like even when I get out, if I hear a car running or you're like looking around your neighbors, and some of it's because our kids play and we have warm interactions, but there's just people that are just that like 10 feet from the door to the car makes a difference in like seeing your neighbors.
yeah. At
I
least
remember living in Edmond,
from
and yeah, right. The woman across the street came and went for, I don't know, 7, 8 months. She lived there, and she would pull in, close the door. I never saw her, and we called her Nancy. I don't know what her name was. We just never. And I remember thinking like, because I had my kids were playing in the street, and she would pull in and pull in the garage, and I was like, I don't even know what color hair she has. I've never seen her. Right? Trash cans would appear under the cover of darkness or whatever, and I was just like, it is weird to live across the streets from someone and have no idea even what they look like. I could run into her at the grocery store and have no idea. And so I think that seeing that from two different sides now has made me much more cognizant of my responsibility as a member of this community to like wave hello to people, right? Even when you're driving, when you're walking, like if
Yep.
the weather's nice, I put my windows down and I drive
Yeah.
just so I can like have an extra hello to someone that I might not know, but like it helps
Right.
build trust and a sense of community just among people around. And then someday, right? Maybe we have a cookout, we have a conversation or
Right.
whatever, but it starts that process of building relationships.
Yeah, I think that's so key and so important, and we really can't. I mean, I don't believe in my heart that we can begin to repair this rift that we've seen split our communities apart during COVID, between politics and the pandemic and all of that. I don't think we can begin to repair that until we start to look at our neighbors as as our neighbors, right? And wave at them and take the time
Right.
to get to know them and
Right.
take the time to. And again, like for me, it's different because I'm out on 40 acres. So when I pull up, the only people I have to say hi to are, they're not people, they're chickens. Right? They don't
Right.
they don't wave back. But I'm grateful to live in a community where we have a community of people who are committed to constantly creating space for people to gather together and in fellowship and support one another. And I'm really blessed to live in the community that I live in.
Yeah. Erica, before we wrap up for today, you mentioned a couple of the good bills. You've been watching McBride's bill and some others. Are there any other pieces of legislation that our listeners should tune into and be aware of as we kind of go to the next hurdle in the legislative process?
Well, without my piece of paper in front of
I
me,
sprung this on you without a
sprung
list,
it
I'm
on
sure.
me. But I know that there's quite a few bills out there right now, and we're getting ready. How about this? We'll be posting this into our group, I think, next week in our Facebook group. So if anybody wants help kind of following and tracking the bills, they're welcome to come join our Facebook group. That'll be a good place to track some of these good bills and see where they are and when your voice is needed. So there's quite a few bills out there right now actually, I believe there's 2 bills for expanding the state school board to remove the complete control of those positions from the governor only. So the governor will still have the seats that he's able to appoint, but I believe both bills have appointments that would come from the House and appointments that would come from the Senate to expand that board. And there are requirements behind these that they are people who have had experience in education, which I think is important, particularly now as we have a state school board who doesn't seem to connect the dots with things all of the time because of their lack of experience. So those are exciting. We've got some bills. We still have one bill alive that addresses the accreditation process and removing the sole decision behind school accreditation from the State Department of Education. You know, accreditation was never meant to be this kind of a weapon to whip people in line, and that whole decision process around accreditation is being abused. And so it's nice to see that we still have some legislation after this first deadline week that is alive to address that. Of course, we still have the bill that was carried over from last session from Representative John Talley out of Stillwater, addressing corporal punishment for children with disabilities. That is still taking place in many districts across the state. It didn't quite get across the finish line last session, but they were able to capture it. And so that is still a live one that we're going to continue to push for. We're working closely with our friends at Appleseed and the Advance Oklahoma Kids Coalition on that. We still have, there were several bills this year that were put out for free school meals for all. Some of those have died, but I do believe there's at least one that is still alive. So we're going to be pushing for that one quite a bit. I'm trying to think. I mean, there's some funding bills out there protecting funding for alternative kids that are needing alternative education that we're supporting. So I would say out of our top 400 bills we started with that we narrowed it down to, we've probably got 15 positive bills that we're going to be tracking and only 3 that we're really pushing against. And that's just within our scope of rural schools. There's obviously more bills out there that are good and more bills out there that are bad, but these are just kind of the ones that we picked as most important. We're concerned about, there is a virtual school day bill out there by Senator Kristen Thompson that would eliminate schools' ability to have distance enrichment days, which, that's not for people in urban and suburban schools, that may not be as big of a deal, but for our rural schools who are struggling with teacher retention and getting access to resources for kids in remote areas, that's an important thing we want to be able to hang on to. So that's one of the bills that we're going to be really pushing probably the most against from a rural perspective this session. And good Lord, I don't know any of the numbers because who can keep all that straight without it in front of you?
Right.
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 But I am encouraged that there does seem to be quite a bit of stuff out there to rein in Superintendent Walters and some of the things that are going on at the State Board of Education. So we'll see how that all plays out in the coming weeks.
Well, yeah, I think public education continues to be the most animating force in Oklahoma, right? When it comes around to advocacy and political stuff, because it's probably the one that, one of the issues that touches the most people, the most families
Yeah.
in such a like important way and like a long standing way, right? Like this is not just a, if your kids are in public school, they're in public school for 12, 13 years, right? And like you have a lot of impact from that system, and it's very important. So, Erica, I appreciate all the work that you do with the Rural Schools Coalition.
Thank you.
We hope to have you back maybe later after session to kind of shake down how everything went and
I
like
would love to.
figure out what happens next. How's that sound?
That would be great. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, my guest today has been Erika Wright with the Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition. You can connect with them on Facebook. If you go to facebook.com/groups/OK Rural Schools, or just go to Facebook and search for Oklahoma Rural Schools Coalition. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Listeners, thanks so much for being here. It's been great to be with you. Thanks to Erika Wright for being our guest today. What I need you to do right now is to go to our website and sign up for emails if you haven't done so already. Let'sfixthis.org. Scroll to the bottom. Sign up at the very bottom of the homepage. Get on the email list. Because in the next few days, we're going to receive an email from me personally. I'm doing this right at this time. And we'll contain information about the legislation. We'll contain information about volunteer opportunities. Because we need, folks, is we need all of you, thousands of little emissaries for democracy, right? Little evangelists for democracy, little bright spots in the darkness throughout our state to listen. Sometimes I want you to listen to your friends and neighbors and family about what matters to them most. We need to demonstrate to our friends and neighbors and family that people care about what's going on in their lives, and that people care about taking the time to listen to them, and about how to make sure they know they're heard. And then, right, once that relationship is strengthened, we can work on moving them to be more engaged in the civic process, including voting. It's very important election year. Not even so much a popular ticket.